The laughter followed Daniel Carter all the way down the polished hallway, louder than the closing doors behind him. 10 minutes earlier, he had walked into the biggest deal room of his life carrying a worn leather folder, a child's drawing tucked inside it, and the last hope of saving the small company his late wife had once helped him build. Now, after being mocked for being a single father who looked more like a delivery driver than a businessman, Daniel was walking away with nothing. What nobody in that room knew was that the man they had laughed out of the deal room was the only person who understood what the company was truly worth. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and never judging someone by their appearance, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, leave a comment, and subscribe to ***, spread kindness ***. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to people who need a little hope. Daniel had never imagined his life would become this difficult. At 38, he was raising his 9-year-old daughter, Emma, alone after losing his wife, Claire, to a sudden illness 3 years earlier. He had learned to become everything at once: father, cook, housekeeper, driver, homework helper, and businessman. Every morning began before sunrise. He prepared Emma's breakfast, packed her lunch, braided her hair because Claire had taught him how, and then drove her to school before heading to the office of Carter Precision, a small engineering company he had inherited with Claire. The company was struggling, but Daniel refused to sell it cheaply because it employed 27 people, many of whom had families depending on their salaries. For months, Daniel had been negotiating with a massive international investment group called Sterling Ventures. Their buyer, Richard Hayes, was known for acquiring struggling companies, restructuring them, and turning them into highly profitable businesses. Daniel knew Sterling could save Carter Precision, but he also knew they would only do it if he could prove the company had a future. That future depended on a manufacturing contract Daniel had spent nearly a year developing with a major automotive supplier. The contract was finally ready, and its potential value was enormous. The meeting was supposed to decide everything. Daniel entered the conference room wearing the best suit he owned, a navy jacket that had been carefully repaired at the sleeve. His shoes were polished, although one heel was beginning to wear down. Across the table sat 6 executives in expensive suits and watches that probably cost more than Daniel's car. They looked at him, then at one another, and one of them smiled. Daniel began his presentation calmly. He explained the new contract, the company's production capabilities, and the projected revenue. But before he could finish, one executive interrupted him and questioned whether he had the experience to manage a company of that scale. Another asked why his financial forecasts were printed on ordinary paper instead of being presented in an expensive presentation folder. Then someone made a joke about how Daniel probably had to leave early to pick up his daughter. The room erupted in laughter. Daniel stood silently for a moment. He could have argued. He could have reminded them that he had worked 16-hour days to keep the company alive. He could have told them that while they were laughing, he had been sleeping in his office during the hardest months. But he simply closed his folder. The lead executive leaned back and told him that Sterling Ventures was no longer interested in the deal. They wanted to buy the company, but at a price so low that accepting it would mean laying off most of the employees and selling the company's machinery piece by piece. Daniel refused. That was when the laughter became even louder. He walked out. Outside the building, the cold afternoon air hit his face. Daniel stood beside his old sedan and stared through the windshield without starting the engine. His hands were shaking. Not because he had lost the deal, but because he knew what would happen next. Payroll was due in 9 days. The bank had already warned him about the company's outstanding loan. If he could not secure funding soon, 27 families could lose their income. His phone suddenly buzzed. It was Emma. She asked if he was coming home early. Daniel swallowed the pain in his voice and told her yes. When he arrived home, Emma was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by colored pencils and school papers. She looked at him carefully and immediately knew something was wrong. Children often notice the things adults try hardest to hide. Daniel told her the meeting had not gone well. Emma looked down at her drawing. It was a picture of 3 people standing beneath a large blue sky. Her mother was on one side, Daniel was in the middle, and Emma was holding both their hands. She quietly told her father that Mom always said he was good at fixing things. Daniel smiled through his tears and hugged her. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Daniel returned to his laptop. He opened the company's financial records and began working. He remembered something from months earlier. The automotive supplier had sent him a revised technical document that most executives had overlooked. A small section mentioned a new production requirement that would begin within 18 months. Daniel read it again. Then again. His eyes widened. The new requirement meant Carter Precision was one of the few small manufacturers in the region already equipped to meet it. If the contract expanded as expected, the company's value would be several times higher than Sterling's offer. Daniel immediately called the supplier's representative. The next morning, he received confirmation. The contract was not only real. The supplier wanted to increase the order. But there was one problem. Sterling Ventures had already begun telling the market that Carter Precision was a failing company. Daniel knew he had only one chance. He contacted another investment firm, but the meeting was scheduled for 3 days later. 3 days felt like 3 years. On the morning of the meeting, Daniel arrived early. He carried the same worn leather folder, but this time he also carried something else, a handwritten note from Emma. She had written that morning that her father was the strongest person she knew. Daniel placed the note inside his folder. The new buyer arrived shortly afterward. His name was Michael Grant, and unlike the executives from Sterling Ventures, he did not look at Daniel's old car or inexpensive suit. He looked at the documents. Daniel presented the numbers, the new contract, the employee records, and the company's long-term plan. Michael listened carefully without interrupting. Then he asked one question. He wanted to know why Daniel had refused Sterling's offer when he desperately needed the money. Daniel explained that selling at that price would have destroyed the company and left dozens of families without work. Michael leaned back in his chair. The room became silent. Then Michael asked for a few minutes to review the documents. Daniel stepped outside. He stood in the same hallway where he had been laughed at days earlier. But this time, nobody was laughing. After several minutes, Michael suddenly came out of the room looking concerned. He asked his assistant where Daniel had gone. The assistant said Daniel was waiting outside. Michael looked toward the hallway and said the words that changed everything. "Where did he go? Bring him back. I want to talk to him." Daniel returned to the room. Michael stood up and told him that Sterling had completely misunderstood the company. They had treated Daniel like a desperate seller, but the documents proved he was protecting something much more valuable than a business. He was protecting his employees, his customers, and the future his wife had helped him build. Michael offered Daniel a deal. Not an acquisition that would erase his company, but a partnership that would provide the capital Carter Precision needed while allowing Daniel to remain in charge. Daniel stared at the offer in disbelief. For the first time in years, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Relief. Months later, Carter Precision had doubled its workforce. The new manufacturing contract had transformed the company. The employees who once feared losing their jobs were now training new workers. And Daniel still arrived at work early every morning. He still drove the same old car. He still packed Emma's lunch. But now, when people looked at him, they saw something different. They saw a man who had refused to let humiliation determine his worth. One evening, Daniel returned home to find Emma waiting at the front door with another drawing. This time, there were hundreds of people standing behind her and Daniel. At the top she had written, "Dad never gave up." Daniel looked at the drawing and hugged his daughter tightly. He realized then that the biggest victory had never been the contract or the investment. It was proving to his daughter that being underestimated did not mean being defeated. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who may be going through a difficult time, and subscribe to **** spread kindness ***. Sometimes one small act of encouragement can remind someone that their story is not over yet. And before we end, I want you to do something special. Comment I will never give you P if you believe that kindness, courage, and second chances can change a person's life. Because sometimes the person everyone laughs at today becomes the person everyone wishes they had believed in tomorrow. Daniel walked into that first deal room as a struggling single father. He walked out as a man who had lost a deal. But he never lost his dignity. And when the right person finally looked beyond his worn suit, his old car, and his tired eyes, they discovered what the others had been too arrogant to see. A man who wasn't trying to sell his company. He was trying to save it. And sometimes, that kind of determination is worth more than any number written on a contract.